So we have you thinking now about 10 to 15 years into the future, and our next guest is a tech futurist who helps CEOs practice what she calls strategic foresight. Please welcome Amy Webb and Julia Boorstin.
Carry on. It's been a long time coming.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so excited for this conversation because I think futurists have the most fascinating way of approaching the present. So, Amy, you're a futurist. That does not mean you predict the future. Explain what it is that you do.
Well, it doesn't not mean that I predict the future. So I have actually a visual that might make this a little bit more digestible, because I realize it sounds like I've got kind of a strange job title. So I'm a quantitative futurist, and the work is long-term scenario planning and long-range planning. So if there are a couple of slides that help explain that. There we go. So in a nutshell, this is what my organization does. So we look for emerging signals of change and trends. Trends in my world are not trendy. So we use an obscene amount of data. We use models. There's a methodology. So we don't do a thing where we're like interviewing people. And that gives us a sense of what's influencing the future. So this is what we know to be true today. But that alone, that stuff results like in a trend report, but that alone is not enough for people like you to make a decision. So we have to combine what we can understand about today with what we don't know. Those are uncertainties over which no one entity has total control. So we combine those two things, and that tells us what's plausible about the future. And then you have to know what to do about it. So that's strategy. So if we drill down on that Venn diagram, the trick is to take all of that information, and if we can click to the next slide. There we go. To ask, where is the world going, where will value be created, and how will we participate? These are three critical questions that I see executive leaders too often not asking and answering using data. The center of that Venn diagram is strategic foresight. So that is what I do. And if you encounter a futurist who's got bold, crazy predictions about the future, but no actual modeling or data to back it up, I wouldn't place any bets.
So tell us a little bit more about strategic foresight. Give us some examples of how it would work with some of your clients. Because you're consulting to big Fortune 500 companies all around the world.
Right. So I can give you a couple of examples. We were asked by a very large international telecommunications company a couple of years ago where the opportunity and the disruption was in the future. And so we did built all the models, had all the data, came back with a handful of scenarios. One of those scenarios, so I think we did this work around 2018 or so. One of those scenarios was what we called the free internet scenario. So what we discovered was there was this company called Amazon that had a project that nobody knew about yet, and tiny little CubeSats. So these are small constellations of satellites, much smaller payload than a traditional satellite, that could be sent up and provide space-based internet. There was another company at that point, little known, Starlink. So Elon Musk was working on something similar. So we got all this data, and we're like, look, we think it's plausible in the future that a traditional company is going to get unseated by one of these upstarts, because for them, they don't have to turn a profit for this to be valuable for them, right? So Amazon could use this as a way to scale AWS and other places. Musk at the time, we knew, was trying to build up Starlink or SpaceX and was going to need government help. So that's what we saw coming. This wasn't like a fantasy or something. We had data and we had models to show it. And what this did was position those leaders to have a 2-year head start ahead of everybody else. The reason that's important is because telecommunications companies are significantly margin constrained, badly. So if they had this advance notice, that gives them the ability to shift business models. So that's one place where...
And to shift away from competing with Starlink.
Yeah, so to be quite frank, they could have shifted a little more quickly than they did, but that's the other piece of this. Part of foresight isn't just sort of showing here's what the future looks like. You have to build internally some muscle to be more flexible and adaptive. And I see that happening less and less the more complicated that technology gets.
So, and what's interesting is in looking to the future in this concept of strategic foresight, it's not about coming up with one plan. It's about coming up with a variety or flexibility around planning.
Right. So the better way to think about this is, I mean, everybody here is familiar with, sort of shorter term strategic planning. So that's your 1 to 3 year, whoever's lending you money, investment banks, they want to see that. Your boards want to see that. And the challenge is that a lot of companies get stuck oscillating between strategy and execution. The issue is that the world will continue to change around you. So if you are not continually asking what if and taking in and ingesting data from other sources and starting to play out different plausible scenarios, you will either get stuck or you will go out of business.
So how far ahead are you looking? How far ahead should your clients or CEOs be looking?
Well, it depends on the industry that you're in. So healthcare, in industries that are heavily regulated, there is sort of pharmaceuticals, healthcare, insurance. On the one hand, you go a little further out because some of the models, drug discovery takes a little bit longer. On the other hand, risk is changing fast. So these are industries that historically have said, we don't have to make any decisions tomorrow. We're regulated. We go at a slower pace. And that's really a dangerous position for them to be in. So it really depends on the industry.
But what's the range? Are we talking about 5 to 10 years or 5 to 20 years?
We do a lot of work in pharmaceuticals. We would love for them to think closer to the 5-year mark. But if we're talking about, so here's a great example that I don't think anybody has been thinking through. So we've got these GLP, what are they called?
GLP-1s.
Yes, yeah. The Ozempics of the world. So that's become a cash cow for a handful of companies. And those same companies sold diabetes medication. So we're basically swapping out one annuity for another. However, what happens when we have a lot of people whose overall health improves over time? Well, they need a lot less medication. So I think, on the one hand, you want to do the short-term planning to figure out where's the market going and how do we prepare these people. On the other hand, it's entirely plausible that people are going to live much longer and take more risks. So here's a great example. What happens if everybody starts eating fast food? I know the data say that people aren't eating junk food anymore. But they may not be reaching for a bag of Doritos, but they're still eating unhealthy food because the idea is, you're not going to gain weight. Your cholesterol is still going to go up. So these are the kinds of different variables that they're the levers that I don't see people pulling. And as a result of that, this is going to be a thing where it's going to feel like disruption came from around the corner and nothing could be done, which is nonsense. You could have seen in advance and then planned for it.
And so your goal is to work with all of your clients to make sure that they're constantly aware of the shifting landscape and the things that they need to be aware of or prepared for, whether it's 3 or 10 years in the future.
Right. So the idea is you don't have to be prepared for everything, but you do have to be prepared for anything. So part of that is the knowledge of what's coming and the ability to work with uncertainty, but then you also have to sort of funnel that down throughout the organization. I'm taking you way off script here, but I just thought of a really good story to tell you.
Tell us.
Okay. One of my favorite CEOs that I work with on the planet, this guy is brilliant.
You can't tell us who it is.
I'm not going to tell you who it is. He is very, very, very smart. He works he runs a huge company that has something to do with financial services. He has figured out literally a market-changing, different way to think about risk that will absolutely shift how the economy works in some ways. So he's nailed it. He's figured it out. It's technically plausible. In fact, part of the reason why we even talked about this to begin with is we were both in Davos, and he was wanting to talk about quantum computing, and I was like, you don't need a quantum computer for this. So anyhow, that's where the conversation started. The problem is, inside the organization, there's a lot of resistance. So the C-suite, he's got his C-suite, the click down below that, they don't quite understand what it is or how it works. And then the layer below that, suddenly there's a lot of resistance. We don't have the data. The data aren't cleaned. And the reason for all of this is a lack of more comprehensive understanding and that ability to be agile. People kind of get, they ossify, especially in these larger companies and especially as they climb up the ladders. I think it's relevant to everybody here because as you scale and grow your own companies, this is something you have to think very deeply about. Because technology, I don't care what anybody says, it's miraculous, it's exciting, whatever. It terrifies people in the rest of the company because they can't envision where they are relative to where the technology is and how things are moving.
So what's interesting to me about all of this is that you're coming up with these scenarios based on all, you don't have to be prepared for everything, you do have to be prepared for anything. What happens when something that's very unexpected, like a global pandemic happens?
Yep.
That is, maybe you foresaw that this was a potential thing that could happen in 2020. But when something that feels very much out of left field comes and shifts the whole global economy, how do you address that? Do you throw out, first of all, did you foresee that? Second of all, do you throw out everything you've been working on to adapt to this new scenario? What happens then?
So there's two questions there. Let me answer the first part first, and then the what, and then what do you do about it? So I think a lot of people like to use this phrase "black swan." It's a famous phrase, came from a great book, and I believe that there is no such thing as a truly unpredictable event. I think that there is paying attention to signals, and if you can do that, you can slow down time. And I think that we're just worried about what's happening this quarter. We've got our next investor meeting. We've got our next earnings call, and then we'll deal with the rest of it later. So what do you do when it feels like suddenly, like tariffs, right? Or COVID or whatever it is, it seems to come out of nowhere.
Tariffs may be less unexpected than COVID.
Tariffs are 100%, yes. Nobody should have been surprised at this point. But the question is, what do you do as a leader? Anybody in the room from a state where it snows a lot? I'm originally from the Midwest, so any Chicagoans? George Wendt just died. I'm sorry yeah, I know, horrible, right? Very sad. So if you grow up in Chicago or a place where there's snow, you have to learn how to drive on ice. And if you have ever driven on the ice before, and if you're not used to it or you don't know how, your first instinct is to slam on the brakes. It's like the moment that you start skidding, most people hit the brakes hard. And that is not the right thing to do because that'll ensure that you're spinning out of control. The thing that you have to do instead, which feels weird and wrong, is that instead of slamming your foot on the brake, you have to steer into the slide. And you steer into the slide, you react, you move, you steer into the next slide, you react and you move. And it's analogous to what an organization should be doing in a time of soul-crushing, deep uncertainty.
But what does that look like? What does that mean if there's a global pandemic? What are you steering? What is steering into the slide mean?
So the way that you survive something like that is in a car, you have to keep your eye fixed on some point in the future, and you're steering into the slide and basically dealing with that uncertainty rather than trying to stop it. The problem with COVID when it happened, the problem with tariffs for a lot of companies, is that without that long-term perspective in mind, everybody went into panic mode. If you as a leader understand, regardless of what's happening, this is where we are headed, but we're going to be agile, in how we get there, we're willing to steer into the slide, then you survive. But that has to be cultural throughout the whole organization.
You said earlier this idea of paying attention to the signal. And I think there's a question for everyone here. How do you distinguish between the signal and the noise?
Right.
And when do you know now's the time that consumer behavior is going to change meaningfully? This is time to change the course. Or we should keep our eye focused on the same point in the horizon and keep going forward. How do you determine when it's time to make those calls?
It's a good question because we're living through noisy times. So part of this is data. You have to have good data sources, and you have to have, we have a model and a methodology that helps us distinguish between what is a signal and what is noise. If you absent that, if you're just absorbing what you are hearing, you are definitely going to get led astray. One of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of leaders have traded, if last year was the year of FOMO, fear of missing out, this year, especially as it has to do with AI, is the fear of missing anything. So it's FOMA. And again, you don't have to put yourself in that position. So you have to have a reliable, credible source of those signals. They have to be rooted in data. You have to map out what are the longer term implications and be willing to act.